This is day 2 of the Start Your Podcast Challenge, and I'm so excited. We have started and we are making progress. So, if you followed the video from yesterday, that means by now you already have an idea of what your podcast is going to be about, and most likely what it would entail. But then we are still going to go further and do some more discussion about it so it can be as perfect as it could get. So, today we are going to be talking about audience segmentation and content planning. Audience segmentation and content planning. We are going to be discussing how you can segment your audience, how you can know who exactly you should target so that they could get to listen to your podcast. We are going to talk about how to plan content for your podcast. What exact content can you touch? What exact content are beyond the bridge for whatever kind of podcast you are trying to bring together. So stay tuned and stay blessed. Now, the audience of your podcast are the people who are going to be consuming the content of your podcast. So for you to know exactly the people who are going to be consuming the content of your podcast, who are going to be listening to you, and to be sure they are interested in what you do, you need to first start by understanding the reason you are creating the podcast. If the reason you are creating the podcast is established, you'll be able to know who to target because they would fit perfectly into that reason. Now, most often than not, there are 3 major reasons why rather people do podcasts. So it could be either of these reasons or it could be a combination of the 3. And I'm saying on the long run, there are some short-term goals you would have for your podcast and there are some long-term goals. So I'm going to talk about 3. The first one being community management or community development. You want to build a community for yourself, for your personal brand, or whatever it is. The second reason is for brand engagement. You want people to engage with your brand. But the third reason is sales generation. Now let's discuss these 3 long-term goals. First, community building. Let's assume you are into fashion. You might want to create a community of fashion lovers for yourself. You may want to create a community of people who are just interested in fashion. It could be that you want to create a community of fashion designers and not just anyone. You want to create a community of fashion designers. So automatically, okay, let me go deeper into the example. If I want to create a podcast that would address and grow a community of fashion designers, then the things I'll talk about would most likely be, maybe the business of fashion, how to get opportunities as a fashion designer to exhibit in some massive runway shows, how to develop a portfolio, things that will resonate with a fashion designer. But if I want to create a podcast that will be the community of people who just love fashion, I wouldn't go that route. My content would be mostly around and about maybe how to make certain colors, what to wear, and to where should you wear those things. It would be more of general topics that talk about fashion trends, talk about fashion shocks, and what have you. So if you understand the kind of content you have, it depends on you. Anyways, you could decide that you want to be sure of the kind of content you are putting together before deciding who your audience would be, or you want to decide on who your audience will be so you would know how you can serve them efficiently and effectively. Let's say I want to build a community around let's say I want to do a podcast on food and I want to build a community around that. Now, everyone loves food, everyone eats food, but how deeper or what is the most streamlined thing I could do to have a specific audience that would pay me? Am I going to create a community of chefs so we could talk about different standards, international standards, opportunities, and what have you in the food space? Or I just want to talk generally to everyone and anyone? You understand? So that would help you to know who you are going to be serving with your content. Now, leaving that, let me use a general example. Let's say you just want to be talking about life's lessons, life's motivations. Who are the people your audience would make more sense to? It is impossible for your podcast to serve everyone. It is very, very impossible. Even if you want to talk about, let's say, relationships, for example, at the end of the day, your content should either be targeted towards the younger generation or the older generation, or maybe you want to talk about platonic relationships and platonic friendships. You want to talk about how people deal with certain friendship issues on a day-to-day basis, you would know that automatically stuff like that should be more targeted at young adults. So you need to know who or how exactly you're going to be segmenting your content and your audience, so you know how it would fit in well with each other. If you want to be talking about maybe your personal life, your daily life, for example, you just want to put yourself out there as a person that wants to connect with people, that wants to relate with people. Who are the kind of people that you want to attract to yourself? That's another kind of audience segmentation. There's certain types of there are certain types of podcasts out there that engages and attract the most toxic kind of people you can think about. There are some podcasts out there, you will know that people who listen to this podcast are people who are thinkers, people who are futuristic in the way they think. So who are the kind of people you want to attract? So whether it's about food, whether it's about general life, whether it's about motivation, whether it's about fashion, whether it's about spirituality, whether it's about tradition, whether it's about music, no matter what that podcast is about, there has to be a specific audience you are going to be serving, and that would help you know how you can build a community. Now, the second reason people do podcasts is for brand engagement. Whether you are a personal brand or you work with a bigger brand, even the biggest of brands these days actually host podcast sessions to drive conversations around what they think the people need to hear, the people need to listen. I would like that you quickly watch this short video where there was a better explanation about how podcasts help for easier and better brand engagement. So the second reason people start podcasts is for brand engagement. Now this is not really streamlined to a particular kind of brand, whether it's a personal brand, whether it's a corporate brand. There are times people intentionally start podcasts to drive certain conversations that would, at the end of the day, lead to sales generation. So if you're interested in building or starting a podcast just because you need more people to engage with your brand, then you are good to go. Okay, so the third reason people do podcasts is for the sake of sales generation. The truth is that the three reasons we've mentioned so far work hand in hand with each other, but you still need to be quite specific, because if you don't really plan to drive sales with your podcasts, then there's a way you can channel the discussion. If you plan to drive sales, there's another way you plan your discussion. It's either you involve whatever you are selling or whatever brand is involved in that podcast is selling, so you could just talk about it. Or maybe you may not come off as trying to sell something from the beginning, but later on, especially let's say your podcast is about lifestyle, and later you come up with a lifestyle show. You must have developed a community that would be so strong or so large and so organic that they would engage with your brand to help you make sales towards that show. So you see how the three of them work hand in hand with each other. It's quite important to know which of these three goals you want to achieve on the long term. Now, if it's actually possible that you want to achieve the three things, it is very, very possible. But you need to know that podcasting takes intentionality. You need to first build a community that would engage your brand to achieve rather sales generation. Now, on the short term, you could have certain goals. What do you want to achieve with this community or with this podcast you are doing on the short term? When you know that on the long run you want to build a community, what are you going to do about it on the short term? If I know that by the next 3 to 4 years I want to have built a very strong community of, let's say, fashion lovers, for example, what am I doing from now on? What am I going to be achieving with my podcast from now on to ensure that I start making or taking my baby steps or my adolescent steps towards that massive goal? So you need to have all of that in place. Now let's talk about content planning. You would remember from the video the video you engaged with yesterday, that podcasting is a very intentional activity. You don't want to just start a podcast because you think you can just pick your phone to record something or whatever it may be. Your podcast is like telling a story of a particular idea or a particular concept, and every story needs to have a continuity to it. It doesn't mean that the next episode must continue from where the last one stopped rather. What it just means is that there must be a level of there must be a level of relation within or between all the content you are pushing out. And taking it back a bit, still on taking it back a bit to audience segmentation. Well, I'm in between audience segmentation and about to cross into talking about content planning. All right. So, as you are starting your podcast, you need to be very, very clear on the kind of podcast you want to start. After you've defined the goal in question, then the next thing to do is to choose a name. Choosing a name for your podcast is an easy and tough decision at the same time, because choose a name that is unique. You want to choose a name that will make it easy for people to guess what your podcast might be about. You want to choose a name that has not been chosen by someone else. You want to choose a name. So there are so many things to put together when choosing a name, but the major guideline I would give you is to be very simple, to be very plain. Don't try to be too deep with your name. Don't try to be too shallow. Just do it. And if or when you decide on a list of names for yourself, out of which you would make a choice, you can decide to go online and search each of the names one after the other to confirm that nobody else is using that name for a podcast or any other creative line of work. You need to be sure of what your niche is going to be. Now, I think I need to dwell a bit on that. What exactly will your podcast be about? There's a need for a particular bracket that would define or confine you to knowing what your podcast will be about. If you decide today that you want to get motivational, ensure that no matter how flexible you want to get with your content, no matter how flexible, how far or how wide you want to go with anything you'll be talking about on that podcast, be sure that there is still something that it draws back to, so that by the time people start engaging with your brand and probably there are some opportunities that open up, it would be easy for those people that want to offer you the opportunity to be sure whether your personality, what you have to offer, what you are a master of, fits in well enough into that opportunity they are bringing to you. For example, you can decide that, okay, I've been using fashion, food, and music a lot. I think I tend to use these three examples a lot. So let's go somewhere else. Let's talk about tech. If you want to start a podcast on tech, technology, and what have you, maybe there could be times that you could talk about music. Maybe sometimes your podcast will take you to talking about people's cultures, cultures and its relationship with tech and how evolution is taking over the whole thing. But no matter what you do, ensure that you don't go outside that tech. Now, you can decide on a broad word, but I always personally advise that you even delve deeper. I mean, you streamline it better. What aspect of tech do you want to be taking? Are you going to be talking about upcoming trends? Are you going to be talking about technology as it relates to a particular field, maybe tech and music, tech and media, or tech and career development, or tech and human resources? Whatever it is, I also tend to suggest to people that whatever you want to create a podcast on, let it be something that you are naturally interested in, you're naturally invested in, so that creating a content doesn't become a chore for you. It doesn't become a point of duty. It doesn't become one of those to-do tasks that feels like it's a whole lot of work. When you are podcasting about something that you're interested in, about something that you can talk about almost effortlessly, because as we said yesterday, you need to research, but when it's about something that you're really interested in, it's easy for you to flow with the content, and it gets easier for you when you're even trying to plan your content. So ensure that it has to be something you are interested in. If you want to be talking about food, are you going to be creating podcasts based on, remember, it doesn't have to, podcast doesn't just have to be audios, it could be audios or visual format. So are you deciding that you're just going to be talking about different foods in the world, the importance of these foods, the cultural history or the historical importance of those foods you're talking about, or you're going to be talking about, you're going to be addressing chefs like I mentioned earlier? Maybe you just want to create a community of chefs and cooks, and you are going to be dishing out valuable content. Maybe once in a while, you are going to be inviting some cooks that are well respected, or people that are coming up, or people that even just started, depending on how you decide to go around your content. All right, I hope I'm not rushing you a lot, but at this point, I want to let you know that it is important to decide on your niche. If it's going to be about spirituality, are you just going to be focusing on a particular religion and discussing the principles of a particular religion, or is it that you want to be talking about different religions from different places? Now, for these two examples I just gave, the audience involved would be different. For example, I am a Christian. If I decide to open a podcast that discusses Christian values and principles from the Bible, of course, I automatically know that my target audience would be people, young Christians, maybe not young Christians, but I mean people who want to grow and who want to understand more about the Christian lifestyle. Now, if I decide that my podcast is on spirituality, but I want to be exploring different kinds of religions, the setbacks people talk about in a particular religion, the fact that we all have to respect each other's religion, my audience would be totally different from Christians, from maybe people who want to really grow deeper as Christians. My target audience would most likely be people who love history, people who love exploration. My target audience could even be students of certain courses in the university who need to explore different kinds of different kinds of religions or traditions for whatever reason. These things are far and wide, so plan exactly the niche you are going to be focusing on. Streamline if you can, but I'm sure that you can streamline, because this would even help you to get better with your audience segmentation. So let's get fully into planning your content. Now, your plan for your content could go in any way that is convenient for you or that appeals to you, because at the end of the day, you must love your podcast first and well enough so that you can be able to boldly talk about it, market it, and relate it to the people that need to hear about it. So personally, I do suggest that people get to work with a batch of episodes per maybe season, or per volume. You could say volume 1 having 7 episodes, or season 1 having 10 episodes, so that after each of these episodes or each of these seasons, you can take a pause, you can step back, retrospect, see what could be added, see what could be changed, and then you get to take it from there. Now, before you even go there, I need you to imagine your podcast as if you are trying to I need you to imagine your podcast rather as an outlet to discuss something you really love with people. So if I guess I need to use one of my favorite examples, so let's choose food. Let's choose food. So if I want to do a podcast on food, around food. Now, going back to what I said earlier about streamlining, I could decide to streamline it to the fact that, okay, my goal is to build a community of cooks and chefs all over the world on the long run. And of course, when you get to that kind of level, there's no way you wouldn't be able to make money as a podcaster or from your podcast. We are still going to discuss monetizing your podcast and money making streams from your podcast later on. So let's assume that is my goal. The first thing I want to do when I'm planning my content, maybe when I want to start brainstorming for ideas, I would wonder, as a chef myself, as a cook myself, what are the things that I would love to discuss whenever I visit a fellow chef or a fellow cook. So I can decide to first make sure my first episode is something introductory to introduce myself to my audience and to introduce the podcast, to tell them what the podcast is going to be about. And then in the next episode, I could talk about maybe 2 or 3 issues that cooks and chefs face many of the times, and how you probably were able to successfully deal with that challenge recently, or maybe you brought someone on your podcast to both discuss how people could navigate the options people have with which they could navigate that issue, with which they could navigate the problem or that challenge on its way. That is another episode. In the following episode, I can decide to share an opportunity for chefs or cooks that I found out about that I believe that lots of people may not know, or that people know but really don't know how to go about. Maybe it's an international application, maybe it's a popular competition for chefs that people probably did not know about. Maybe you mentioned two, three, four, five of them, and you are probably lucky enough to get representatives from the organizing bodies of those opportunities to come talk about it. That is another episode. Okay, so far we've had three episodes. From there, I can decide that in my next episode, I will talk about certain foods or food presentation styles that people should consider or that is not done well enough and all that. Now, with these four episodes I just mentioned, all of these are still drafts. So, for a start, you need to make as much drafts as possible for the sake of this challenge, this 12-day podcast challenge. You can start with five, a minimum of five. So just make some drafts out. Just and I'm sure that if you are really interested in doing this for real, you would definitely have more than five ideas. But then here we go. So make drafts of different ideas. Now let me use another idea. Let's say I want to go motivational. Yeah, maybe my podcast is about motivating people and helping people to achieve their goals. I can decide that on the first episode I share a story of myself needing a very strong source of motivation at a low point in my life, and how I discovered I was able to get through that point, how I got whatever motivation I got, and why that related to why I'm starting this podcast, so I can motivate other people to achieve their goals. So maybe that's the first episode, and then in the second episode I can decide to first share a story. And yes, like I said before, podcasting is a form of storytelling, whatever story it might be, right? It doesn't have to be, tortoise, and, it doesn't have to be a conventional definition of a story. Your day to day activities is a story. Something you experienced is a story. Something you have to tell people about, whatever you're interested in, is also a story. So you can decide to say something about depression, or maybe you get somebody who is into psychology to come discuss with people about how to not get into depression and what to do when people think they are beginning to slip into depression. Then maybe another day I decide to come and break tables. I decide to come and say things, talk about things that people shy away from, but are the reasons people have not been able to achieve their personal goals. Maybe it's laziness, maybe it's whatever that it is. Maybe I could come in another episode. So all of these things, you just need to sit down and have different drafts. Now, imagine myself teaching you currently, or taking you through this 12-day podcasting course. It is very easy for anyone listening to me right now to know I am so, so, so interested in what I'm talking about. And I know my onions well enough. I've done my research to a very good level, because to the best of my knowledge, I believe that I am talking from a place of being knowledgeable and having this whole thing planned out well enough. So if I was not really interested in all of this, of course it would reflect in the way I talk. I would not sound I would not be able to communicate in a way that would carry you, my audience, along enough. So please make sure that you have as many drafts as possible, and from there your plan would have a good head start. So I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to bore you with too much more information, so I'm going to hold it here. Kindly listen to this and indicate on the platform when you've listened, so that somebody can attend to you and you can get your assignment. I look forward to tomorrow, day 3 on the Start Your Podcast 12-Day Challenge. My name is Adiemi, and this is Kina Land. Take care.